going here? Yes, still? Sure, still, yeah. Hello? Let's keep it.
So, as normal, we'll start with a few questions from me and then open it out to the audience. So, firstly, is the life of editor-in-chief of Vogue really like The Devil Wears Prada?
No, it's very like, for anyone that saw the September issue, which was the feature magazine that was made about my counterparts in America. And that was incredibly similar to the life of British Vogue. But The Devil Wears Prada, not really.
So what does your sort of day-to-day job entail?
Well, it's changed a lot over the past, definitely over the past 5 years, but probably over the past decade, which is when I came to Vogue, which was in 1992. Most of my job was putting together a print magazine, 12 issues a year. We had a catwalk supplement twice a year. Now my job is overseeing a daily, 24-hour digital site, producing a mobile app, an iPad app, a Vogue festival, shopping evening, fashions night out, various books, the magazine, Miss Vogue. So it's much, much more diverse what I do. And that's just Vogue. That's not talking about sort of liaising with the retailers and fashion designers and models and photographers and writers that kind of also make up my world.
And what's your favourite part of your job?
I like it when I get together with my team and we're sitting around my desk and everyone's chucking in ideas and somebody comes up with a really good idea and other people feed into it and you kind of know that you've got a really good idea. That's really fun.
And unlike some of the other kind of high-class magazines, Vogue hasn't suffered the same circulation decrease since the recession. Do you think it's because of its iconic status as part of British fashion that it's maintained its popularity?
We've done quite a lot of research into magazine buying and reading nowadays, and what we've realised is that Vogue is a magazine that people actually want to have, to physically have. They don't read it in the way they do some other newspapers and magazines where it's kind of quite fast and immediate and then it gets left behind. People buy Vogue, they spend quite a lot of money on it, keep it throughout the month, probably keep it actually, many people, for years and years. So it's more of a treat and more of a treasure, and that's what's really helped us, I think, that people want to have a physical magazine.
And do you think the print industry should be trying to compete with the digital industry, or should they sort of try and maintain sort of a separate sort of lush sort of brand?
I think it depends what print you are. I mean, if you're say a magazine like a listings magazine, there's absolutely no point really in trying to grow your print. It's always going to be easier for people to go online. But if you're a magazine that's a kind of specialist magazine that people feel is something that they want to refer to in quite a sort of a continual way, it's fine. I mean, everybody's circulation has gone down. Newspapers, magazines, ours, everybody's is going down. But you're making up for it with what you're doing in digital. So it's just a kind of recalibration.
And something you've said in the past is that you see yourself as more of a businesswoman than a fashion critic. Do you think this attitude is why you've had such a successful tenure as Vogue editor?
No, I don't. No, actually. I'm sort of part businesswoman. I'm not really a businesswoman. I've never really run a business. No, I can't explain why I've kept my job.
And one last question from me before we open it out to the audience. What's inspiring you today?
Golly, that's a really difficult question. What's inspiring me today? I think, and it's not just a plug, I think I got a hard copy of this book that I've written that's coming out in July, and I got the first copy arrived. The first time I've seen it, actually, hard copy with a proper cover and all the details. And I saw that just before I came up here. So I think that's the thing I'm sort of most fixated on today.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to open out to the audience. Storrel's going to come around with a microphone. So if you'd just like to put your hand up if you have a question. Yep, just there.
Hi. Since the royal applause the factory cuts about 2 years ago now, do you think there's been a move in the fashion industry towards ethical fashion? And what do you think maybe the role of magazines like yours have in this kind of new movement?
Well, I think that the whole question of sort of ethical fashion is being debated and discussed in a way that it certainly wasn't, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I think the changes are slow. The role that a magazine like mine can be to kind of remind people, I think, that these are issues worth discussing, but we're not really in a position where we're going to be. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the big brands who are commissioning the factory owners to make the clothes who really have to make the decision about what kind of the way their workers or the supply chain is. And I think the best thing we can do is, we could say, oh well, we won't feature any clothes that are in any kind of a dodgy supply chain, but actually you just don't really know. It would be a lie to say that you're aware of what's happening. You're not, and often it's the tributaries of a supply chain are so convoluted. But I think it's something we can do is engage in the debate and remind people that it's something that's got to be watched. I mean, it's interesting, it's come out, and obviously that was a very extreme thing, but just basically workers' conditions, I mean, in the UK, in lots of cases aren't 100% brilliant either.
Do you think there's an issue with ethical fashion sort of being perceived as more expensive?
It probably is more expensive rather than being perceived as more expensive than fashion like Topshop or Primark. I mean, that's just a fact. The numbers, you're never going to be able to make smaller amounts, and the numbers stack up the same way as you can if you're mass. So I don't think it's a perception. I think it's a reality. A lot of ethical, or not ethical fashion, but fashion that's totally devised with that in mind is probably is a bit more expensive. But I think nowadays, really, you have a great choice. I mean, most people can't afford expensive fashion. Most people have to buy high street fashion or cheap fashion. In my day, we all bought vintage clothes most of the time, because there wasn't such a big high street, so it was kind of second-hand fashion. Now you've got an incredible cheap fashion, wonderful fashion out there, which is a great kind of luxury. But it does mean, I guess, that people sort of don't treasure things so much, that there is a kind of churn in a way that maybe there didn't used to be quite a long time ago.
Thank you.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
So I was wondering, do you think that Vogue and sort of magazines similar to Vogue are doing enough to promote sort of racial diversity? And I mean not just for like a season or for a moment. You have things like the Vogue, like Italia Black issue, which I think is problematic just because you relegate like black models to one issue a year, and then it creates issues with sort of like fetishization, and like it's a very difficult issue to tackle. So do you think that they're doing enough? And if not, what more can be done?
well, you're right, it's a difficult issue. I'm quite anti sort of ghettoization of ideas, whether that's racial or body type or national. And it's not something that I want to do, and it's rather like kind of reverse discrimination, isn't it? I'm slightly against that as well. But if you don't do that, and you're not seeing a natural change in patterns, what do you do? It's a very good question. I don't really know the answer to it. I mean, what I would say is that there is a huge change in terms of fashion models now to really only a few years ago. But I think the interesting thing is that a lot of that's the Asian, and it's the Asian market. It's because you've got a lucrative Asian market there. So you've got China now. So you've now getting a big growth of Chinese models. Ditto India. Afro-Caribbeans are more difficult. You haven't got a big market there. So it's not naturally happening in the same way, I think. I don't know, what do you think? What do you think should be done about it?
I agree, I totally agree with you. It's very difficult. I don't, so, I mean, I think that we fall into certain traps when we think about, like, reverse discrimination, but the truth is that years and years of, like, for whatever reason, like, social and historic, like, oppression or discrimination necessarily, like, create structures which don't allow things to progress naturally. So sometimes we do have to take, like, a bold leap forward and do things that we wouldn't otherwise do, be it, like, with, like, blunt instruments like quotas, because sometimes you won't always get the natural progression you want. So sometimes you just have to choose, like, the black or the Asian model over, like, the like, established.
Well, I think that's kind of happening, but I think it's quite slow, and that's probably just is the way it's going to be, really. You know, I put a sort of blonde, pretty blonde, smiling model on my cover. She will sell more issues even than a dark-haired girl, actually, let alone a black model. I don't know why, but it's a fact. And so you're juggling with economics to some extent. But as I say, as the world is changing and we're becoming so much more international, so much more global, that is just by definition is definitely going to change. And I think it's going to speed up now because of that, because you're really beginning to see, what with the internet also, it's so global. And I noticed that when you look at internet fashion sites, there's much more diversity actually than you're finding in print. So I think it's changing, but it's slow.
Do you think as sort of the industry does become more globalised and sort of maybe Vogue, the brand itself, become sort of more globalised sort of through an online format, do you think each of the countries' sort of Vogue identity will remain very specific?
Well, it's funny, when there was American Vogue, and they're a different company to my company, which is Every Other Vogue, and that Every Other Vogue now I forget if it's 19 or 20 of us. I mean, there are a lot of us now. And remember, it was about 12 years ago that people were saying, well, why couldn't you just have American Vogue and a European Vogue? And, you know, they were talking to, I don't know, I guess it was me, there was Germany, Italy, France, Spain, Portugal at that time, Greece. And we all thought about our magazines, and they are so different. They are so very much tailored to the home team, really. And it's in quite small ways, but in my office I have a wall, and I have a lot of the Vogues on it, and I like to look at the covers and see whether people can tell what country each cover belongs to. And you look at Russian Vogue, it looks completely different to Indian Vogue. You look at Indian Vogue, it looks completely different to French Vogue, to Brazil Vogue, to British Vogue. The markets are very different, and so although online you can, news works, information will work, a lot of the kind of visual currency is actually quite different, I think. And priorities. I remember talking to Christiana, who's my counterpart in Germany, and I was saying, what if a woman suddenly gets a bonus? Where do they spend their money? And I said, in the UK now, it's property. People probably get extra money. They're probably going to invest in property. And she said, cars. She said they'd buy a real status symbol car.
And if you could edit another Vogue, is there one you'd like to edit, or do you think it would always be British Vogue?
Oh, I don't think I could edit another Vogue. I don't think I'd be any good at it.
Okay. Yeah, just in the front here, please. Sarah.
What to you is a fashion icon, and is there anybody out there at the moment that you think one day might obtain that status?
I was saying at dinner my dislike of the word icon, because I think you've got to represent something bigger than yourself to be an icon, an idea. I do think that through time and circumstance and God knows what, Kate Moss has become an icon. She's sort of emblematic of a certain type of person, quite rebellious, sort of beautiful, sort of wild, and she's become sort of recognized as that all over the world. So I would say that she is a fashion icon. Now, who would be a fashion icon? I don't know. Is Kim Kardashian a fashion icon? I'm not sure. I don't know. It's I sort of think people, on the whole, aren't icons, or it's very hard to be in real time. You become iconic almost when you look back through the filter of time rather than in real time. So somebody like Twiggy, in a way, is iconic because she's iconic for the 60s. And she probably was even at the time because she just represented that kind of youthquake moment then. Right now, I'm not so sure there's anybody that's clearly of that nature. I might come up with one as the minutes pass.
And what do you think of, say, the Kim Kardashian or Kate Middleton effect on kind of the fashion industry?
We're kind of polar opposites.
So I meant in the sense of sort of how they sort of wear something and it's sold out.
And it has an effect.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's great. I think that for designers, it's wonderful to have people who sell your clothes, and the fact now that there's so much, you can get your photograph out so easily to so many people, I mean, is a great help. I don't like everything that Kim Kardashian wears, and I'm not sure how much of it actually gets rebought because a lot of it's sort of, custom made. I actually think Duchess of Cambridge is quite an interesting person to look at from that point of view, because her taste and her style is very kind of mainstream. I mean, but she sort of exemplifies the best of it. She does it absolutely brilliantly, and I'm kind of intrigued. I wouldn't say it's exactly fashion, but it's style. It's a certain style, and she certainly shifts clothes. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Hi.
Hi.
What drew you to the fashion industry?
A circumstance. One of those simple twists of fate. I wasn't drawn to the fashion industry. I wanted to first of all be in the music business, and then I ended up in journalism, and I was very happy being a general features journalist. And I came to Vogue as features editor in something like 1988, and my editor at the time, who's called Liz Tilberis, was a fashion editor who'd been made editor of Vogue, and she'd never worked at all with anything other than fashion, which was quite unusual actually for a Vogue editor. Previously they had been more sort of journalists really. And so she was looking for a features editor who would do all of the things that weren't fashion. And she hired me, so I was in charge of the interviews, the cover lines, the gardening column there was then, the cookery there was, reviews, all of that. And but the one thing I had nothing to do with was the fashion. I mean, I had so little knowledge of fashion that none of you here today would understand you could have so little knowledge. Because there was a kind of divide between the two. I mean, physically we were on different parts of the floor. We had a corridor between us and we sort of never went into each other's rooms and everything. And then my employers were looking for somebody to edit GQ magazine that they'd launched. And it was sort of the first monthly glossy man's magazine in the UK. And they'd launched it and it hadn't gone brilliantly, and they were looking for a new editor. And they couldn't find a man who wanted to do the job because all the male journalists thought it was kind of like namby-pamby stuff to do a kind of glossy magazine that had fashion in and grooming, and you'd be dealing with male models and that and the other. And all of the people who did want to do that didn't want to do the long-form journalism that was always meant to be a part of it. And so because I was in the company, I was asked to apply for it. And I think eventually they offered it to tons of men who turned it down, and I got it. And I do think that this is a lot of people's stories in life. You know, it's not necessarily exactly what you do. It's kind of seize the moment, but strange things happen. So I went to GQ, so it's a very long answer. And there I did start sort of dealing with fashion. I had two fashion editors, both called Mark. And in fact, they were quite keen to keep me at an arm's length because quite rightly, they thought I probably wouldn't like the fashion that they were doing. And then to some extent, it suited me to leave them doing it while I got on with other things. But I just started going to fashion shows with them after I'd been at GQ for about a year. And then the Vogue job came up, and I got that. And so that's when I started working in fashion. But I started working in fashion really when I went to Vogue, which, I mean, does seem very odd now, sort of looking back. It seemed quite odd at the time as well.
What's sort of the main difference between editing a sort of a magazine targeted at men compared to one targeted at women?
Well, GQ is different now to what it was then. I suppose when I say it's different, actually, it's probably not in terms of its subject matter. It's probably relatively similar. I think, well, I don't think there's a huge difference in a magazine aimed at men as opposed to women. Vogue is different because Vogue is a fashion magazine. So I think, you know, the difference between, say, a GQ and something like a Red magazine or something, or possibly a Marie Claire, probably isn't that great. But it is different with Vogue because so much of Vogue is fashion.
And quite unusually this evening, we're actually joined by a majority of women, which is something we don't often get in the union audience. What do you think are sort of the challenges facing young women today? And do you have any sort of advice to young women as they kind of start their careers?
I'm looking at you all. I don't know whether it's any more difficult now than it was when I started my career. I think there are different kinds of challenges. It's a different world. There are things that are easier and things that are harder. I also don't think it's harder for women than it is for men, actually. I think there's a lot of pressure. I mean, I've got a son, and so I think maybe I'm slightly slanted to see things through boys' angles at this point, but I don't see that the strains and the stresses of making your way and making decisions and making connections and trying to work out what it is you want to do and how much you're going to commit to a certain path are that different at this stage of life. I think where they do become different is when you have children, and as yet I think that still is harder for women than it is for men. Of course that is changing, and men now have got the option of taking paternity leave and splitting their leave with women, and that's, I think, is going to make a big difference. But I know that women are paid overall slightly lower than men are as well, and that's something that I think is starting to be addressed. I don't know, I've always felt, I guess I've been quite lucky, and I've often worked with women, but I've never felt it difficult to work with men or to compete with men or to be all working together. And I think, but I get the sense that now there is more of again, there's a sort of new tension that women are looking more at their role and where they're going than maybe they were about 10 years ago. I mean, speaking from my own office where I employ a lot of young women, one of the things I'm noticing is that actually a lot of women are making the decision that they don't want to be like my generation. They don't want to work full time. They want to have a more divided life, you know, maybe earn a bit less money to spend a bit more time with their children, consider living, for instance, out of London, which none of us did. They're making decisions to have a slightly different pattern of life, because I think they've watched a lot of people like me, you know, work incredibly hard, and maybe they think I don't want to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, just at the front here.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. My question is, what advice would you give to new and upcoming designers, even designers such as, Medium Kirchhoff, for example, who very publicly had, a long struggle and even made it within the industry and was very, very highly regarded. And you have, new, fresh, very exciting designers coming out of LCF, St. Martin's, who are very much struggling within the industry today.
Well, I think anybody starting off in any creative industry, it's a real struggle. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of people starting off and only a few are going to really succeed. And I don't think fashion is different to writing or art, for instance, with that. I think but what is different is that fashion is a business. And I think that anybody that goes into the fashion industry and looks at it as an art form is not going to build a successful career. You've got to understand the business. You've got to find somebody, a partner or somebody who is going to, if you can't do it, who's going to look after the business side, really help you with the business plan, work out how to pace yourself. So I think that's incredibly important. I think having a clear view of what you've got to offer is also important. How you're going to stand out, but how you're going to stand out in a way that people want. It's no good standing out in some completely insane way that actually nobody's going to buy. You've got to sell to succeed in the fashion industry. Ed and Ben, Medium Kirchhoff, are a very interesting example. They're incredibly talented. I loved what they did. They were very uncompromising about the way they worked, even to not lending clothes to photograph on somebody if they didn't like the person that we wanted to photograph the clothes on. And that was a kind of, minor kind of way they would operate. So they didn't make their lives easy. But in terms of the talent, it was there, and in terms of the will for them to succeed, I think that was there. I mean, I think you've probably got to be prepared to make some compromises as well along the way. But it very much depends, what you're doing, whether you're going to make bags, whether you want to go into tailoring, whether you want to operate at a middle market level. I mean, all these things require slightly different skill sets, but to understand what you can't do and to try and get the support in that, I think, is vital if you're going to start probably any kind of business, actually. But with fashion, I definitely think so.
Do you have a favourite designer at the moment, or does it change, or is there always?
I'm not allowed to have favourite designers. I have to love everybody. I really love the sort of the British designers that we've got who've been growing up in the last decade. Chris Kane, Erdem, Roxander, Jonathan Saunders. I think they've got. They're just fantastic. I go to their shows, and every time they do something that surprises me, and they're doing it on relatively limited budgets, and they're growing their businesses in a very real way as well. And so I'm very, I like them very much. I'm very fond of them, and I admire them. In terms of international designers, well, I think Miuccia Prada's brilliant. Prada's, it's such a clever business that she does these wonderful shows, creates wonderful advertising campaigns, has shop windows that lure people in all over the world, and manages to do it in such a global way, and yet at the same time has a huge business selling basically black trousers. To me that's really clever. I think Nicolas Guesquier at Vuitton is a very, very talented designer indeed. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I think what Michael Kors has done is fascinating in America. And Michael Kors now is one of the most lucrative businesses in the world. And he's kind of done it through selling a kind of middle range American dream and really good medium priced handbags. And I think that's very smart. It's how to sort of package, like Ralph Lauren has done, but he does it at a slightly more up level, a slightly more nostalgic level than Michael Kors. A lot of it is packaging.
And I presume you're not allowed to have a least favourite.
No, I definitely can't have a least favourite. No, definitely can't have a least favourite. Unless they're dead.
Do you think that's a problem in fashion journalism, that it's usually quite complimentary?
Yes and no. I don't think that you necessarily have to be judgmental to write really, really good journalism. I think like the New Yorker magazine has published some really fantastic pieces about designers, which just gave you a real insight into how they operated. They didn't say they would, or they didn't say they were bad. They would let them, sort of hang if that's what they said, if that's what happened. But they didn't say we don't rate them, or we do rate them. And I think that's a perfect valid form of journalism. I think it's hard, if you're a magazine like Vogue, we are financed in the main by advertising. Our circulation, I should know the figure, but I don't know the figure, but the proportion of revenue through advertising is a great deal more than circulation. And I don't think you can really expect people to put money into your magazine if you're just going to publish articles saying they're no good. You have to be kind of pragmatic. But we don't feature people only who advertise. A lot of those British designers haven't spent a penny with us, for instance. There are a lot of international designers who don't advertise that we feature. So it doesn't, I don't think you can just buy your way to success. But it's, you know, it's not an ideal model in kind of truth in fashion. There's not a lot of truth in fashion.
Hi there.
Hi.
Other than the major fashion capitals, which is the most influential city in fashion today?
That's a good question. Well, would you count Shanghai as a major fashion capital?
I wouldn't have. but-
Okay. So I think, you know, that. China's just massive. I mean, Chinese Vogue is probably, I don't know the figures, because interestingly, places like China, they don't really audit the magazines, so you don't know how many they're selling and you don't really know what they're making and everything. But I do know that it's a very, very good business, and that all of the brands really want to be in China, and they regard what's happening in China in all kinds of ways, you know, not just in the magazines, but in social media and everything. It's something that they have to track. India, people are interested in, so Mumbai. I would actually say, in a smaller way, but it's quite interesting how much is going on there, Istanbul. There's a lot of really smart people there who are really involved in fashion and growing it. And so you've got, you know, department stores opening there. You've got it's somewhere that a lot of the fashion brands want to go out. But you've got also a lot of sort of homegrown activity. I mean, I think one of the big issues really is when you've got places like China, for just as an example, you know, for China at the moment is following a Western model. They're buying Western designers. They rate Western artists, Western movie stars and everything still resonate there in a way that Chinese don't hear. So the real change is going to happen when the Chinese, or whoever it might be, start buying more of their own designers, using more of their own models, using more of their own photographers, and where we start wanting to use them. I mean, I do think we are in the last days of the American empire, and that, you know, there is definitely a big shift. It used to be that everything to do with fashion and fashion retail was geared to the American market, and that is really changing. I mean, every year it's shifting further and further east. So that's, you know, it's a really interesting thing that's happening, and I think if you're a business, you have now to be looking at those places and seeing what your market is there.
And where do you think Vogue's going to go next?
Gosh, well, we were talking, weren't we,
Yeah.
earlier about, you know, whenever we launch Vogue, there seems to be a catastrophe. Ukraine was our last launch. So, you know, follow the disasters. There has been talk about Vogue Africa, and I think my company have been thinking about whether Nigeria might be somewhere they could launch. We don't have, I'm just trying to think where else, probably some more South American. We have Brazil and Mexico, but I think that South America is another market. And we've got Vogue Netherlands, but that's the only sort of northern one we've got. So I'm not sure. I don't think there are any more plans right at the moment, though, to launch more Vogues. I think the plan, having had a decade of really massive expansion, I think the idea now is to try and grow the business in the markets where we are, and to get it working with both print and digital. And, you know, Vogue Video, we're growing our video output, our sort of Vogue TV output. We've just hired somebody to look after a whole load of, like 100 Vogue films a year, I think, little films. And that kind of move is what the company are looking at. And also e-commerce. We're just about to, we're about to launch style.com, which was a website that was a fashion website, which is owned by my company. And style.com is now launching in, I think it's November, as a shopping site linked into Vogue and GQ to start off with. So, you know, we're all learning how to do these things. There's lots of room for error to start with, but it's kind of fun as well.
Good, thank you. Yeah, lady just there, thank you so much.
Hi. Hi. Do you think there is a place for feminism within Vogue, or do you think that fashion and feminism are concepts that are necessarily divorced?
Oh no, I definitely don't think fashion and feminism are divorced. It's that same old sort of chestnut about what is it to be a feminist, isn't it? I mean, there is no reason why you can't believe in female equality and opportunity and, you know, celebrate feminism and be interested in fashion and how you look. And ever more so, I think. And I think that it's kind of accepted that we live in a world where people do notice how you appear. Doesn't mean to say you have to buy expensive clothes or designer clothes, but I think you know that you're sending out a message through the way that you look. So there's no reason why a feminist, I mean, I think probably everybody in this room is a feminist as well. So I'm a bit sort of dodgy on the feminism thing at the moment, because I don't know any woman now who would say I'm not a feminist, really, whether they work in fashion or whether they work in finance or whether they work on a farm. I sort of feel we must all be feminists. I don't know, is there anyone in this room that's not a feminist? Men too, you're all feminists? Very good.
And what does feminism mean to you?
I think it means what I just said. I think it means thinking that there should be no barriers to you as a woman in your life. I think it means equal opportunity. I think it means encouraging other women. Although again, I'd say, you know, I kind of feel like I don't really approve of a world whereby people go in and you say it's got to be a woman to do this job. You know, I don't see that we want to change it the other way. It used to be like that. It used to be a man and they got all the jobs. I mean, you know, years back it was really hard for women to work, to have the vote, to have a mortgage, to have anything. We've now got, thank God, to a point where that's true. So, but I don't want to see a world whereby we actually prevent men from having equal opportunities.
So do you think positive discrimination is something that doesn't work anymore?
I'm quite anti-positive discrimination, but we were just talking, you know, you were talking about it. And it's really complicated. I wrote an article, in fact, about it and the idea of quotas. And I don't think it's an easy question. But I do think that when you look at big companies and you look at places where you're trying to inject more women and you're saying you've got to hire a woman or all women shortlists or whatever, the resentment that breeds is so often so destructive to the candidate that actually gets in, that I'm not sure I think it's a good idea. On the other hand, you know, do I want to be at a boardroom table where you've got one woman and 20 men? No, I don't. But it is good. I think that this election, there are some more women, finally, MPs. I know David Cameron's put a few more women in his cabinet. Looks like we might well have a female Labour leader, which would be interesting. And Nicola Sturgeon, of course, she was the great star of the election.
And what impact do you think politics does have on the fashion industry? Have you seen much through the general election?
Well, the fashion industry itself are absolutely impossible to get to say what their opinions are. I mean, the amount of times over the years that I've wanted to do an article about, who's going to vote for what and what do they believe, and never got anybody to say anything. So that much I can tell you, that it's not that they aren't interested, but they're very secretive about it. I think that in this country, in London, that a lot of the retailers were concerned about a Labour SNP victory. I think they felt that people would feel more concerned about spending money, and the industry is a lot about spending money. Anecdotally, I gather since the election, the shops have been doing really well, but that will even out. It's it's sort of it's like apparently property prices have gone up in the last couple of weeks, but I'm sure they'll reality will kick in.
And why do you think there's such a focus on sort of what female politicians wear rather than what they're saying?
Do you think there is rather than what they're saying? I don't feel that people look at what Harriet Harman wears. I mean, the interesting one is Theresa May, isn't it? The famous kitten heels.
And the thigh boots, I think I'm reading an article as well.
Yes, well, I suppose it's quite unusual to be a woman like Theresa May and wear thigh boots. Well, Theresa May said she'd take Vogue to her desert island luxury, so on that level, she's a good person. I've got queries with most else, it has to be said. I don't know why don't. I think people just like looking at what people wear. I think it's sort of as basic as that. I think women like looking at what other women wear. I mean, you go into an office and it's something like the day after the Oscars, and everyone's looking at, oh, you see, look like that. Doesn't she look terrible? Doesn't she look wonderful? Or have you seen her hair? Or where's the Botox gone in that face? Or, I think it's human nature or something.
I was just wondering about the use of Photoshop in fashion and photoshopping things, and the effect that has, especially on younger women's self-esteem. Do you think that should start being limited more to just couture, and as that being an ideal, and having more normal bodies in fashion? Or?
Yeah. Well, about 3 years ago, I produced a little film called It's a Look, which was to go out to 13-year-olds in schools, state schools primarily, and it showed the sort of the trajectory from a model coming into a fashion shoot to everything that happened to her to appearing on the page, and so the hair and makeup, the lighting, my art directors, what you call photoshopping on her, and it was really interesting. I mean, it was a really good little film. One of the things that though was clear is that most 13-year-olds already sort of accept that that fashion images are a construct. They don't think that they're reality. And I do stand by that idea. They are artifice. I don't think we're there to do a picture of reality. Not only that, but with kind of Instagram now, nobody's posting real pictures. Everyone's got that gauzy filter on them or vintage filter, and then you can edit out, I mean, just on yourself you can take out red eye and all of that. So in a way, everybody's doing their own photoshopping already. But I do think there is a question of degrees, and you would be amazed how often I send pictures back and say, could you put back in a line under their eye, or make them not, slim down an arm so that it's so straight or something. I mean, I think there's, it would be nice to see a little bit more reality, but I think that fashion images are there as not so much fantasy really, but just that they are artificial. One thing that's quite interesting is there's a sort of new generation of photographers who are, at the moment, who are rather like the 1990s photographers, like when Jürgen Teller started and Corinne Day and Nigel Shaffron. These ones are much more interested in something that does look more akin to reality, to a reportage. Some of them are photographing on film. The digital photography is quite an interesting thing because if you go to a photo shoot now and you're photographing digitally and you're linked up to a computer, what's happening is that everybody on the shoot is looking at the computer as the pictures are being taken. Well, obviously not the model, but she's coming to look at them in between time. And then they're sort of editing them as they go along. So the model will be saying, oh, I don't like my eyebrow in that, can you change that now? And then the hairdresser's going to say, oh, I did something wrong here, so can you do this? I mean, and because they're watching it all happening and it can actually be adjusted in real time, I think that's having an effect. Does that make sense?
Thank you. I think there was a question just in front. There's time for both, so.
Hi. I was just wondering, when you were earlier talking about fashion icons and the two that you mentioned, Kate Moss and Twiggy, you said that they characterised an era and a moment. How would you describe the moment that we're living now? The moment that we're in now, how would you characterise that? What, in real life or in fashion? Fashion.
I think right now, it's a very exhibitionist moment, actually. We're just working on a feature for the September issue, which is kind of the return of show-off fashion. And I was interested in the pictures in America. They had the Met Ball for the Metropolitan Museum of Art fundraiser, and they have all, the celebrities turn up. And the kind of gaudiness and tackiness of the fashion by our best fashion designers that came out that night was kind of extraordinary. And it's almost like, because of the preponderance of imagery and everybody taking photographs all the time, that the desire to stand out seems to have grown. So whereas in the 90s you had, say, grunge as a fashion movement, and actually I would say even a couple of years ago everything went quite minimal and pared down. There's been a complete pendulum swing, and everything's now about colours and clashing patterns and making yourself stand out. And normally I can see a kind of sociological reason for that, but actually I haven't figured that one out yet. I'm sure I will, but I can't work out what's happening economically or globally to make that happen.
Last question, just from Eleanor.
I was just going to say, what were your thoughts on models like Cara Delevingne going more into the acting industry because they feel that the fashion industry is too focused on what is kind of on the outside and there's not much room for internal growth in their careers?
Well, I think it's understandable. I think modelling can be incredibly boring. And I mean, if you're right at the top of the tree, it's kind of great because you get to travel and you get to work with wonderful photographers and everything, but you are standing there in front of a camera and you are being an image, you're not being you. And that's, even though you bring skill to it if you're good. So I understand why people want to become actors. I think, the question is whether they're going to be any good at it. I mean, the amount of models who become successful actors is relatively few, though I gather that Cara is good. I'm looking forward to seeing, she's been making Tulip Fever, which was a great book by Deborah Mogar, and she's been making that. That's, I think, coming out at the end of the year. So we'll see. But it doesn't surprise me in the least that they want to do it.
Do you think models like Kate Moss, or ones that really are iconic in your opinion, do bring kind of something more internal to it than just an image? I mean, if you talk to anybody about working with Kate, whether that's the hairdresser, fashion editor, the photographer, they all say, it's just, you can see she just knows how to make clothes look wonderful. She's got really good models are able to put something of themselves. It looks like they're just being there, but they're not. They are projecting something, and it's a kind of attitude. And, I think Cara's been very successful at that, and that's why she's became so quickly a success. So I'm not saying that you just stand there, you're not just a clothes hanger. You do, there is a skill and a power in it, definitely.
Well, unfortunately, that is all we have time for this evening, but I'm sure everyone would like to join me in thanking you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.